All right. Hi guys, and welcome back to this channel. My name is Susan Silantoe. As you know, the aim of this channel is to offer information about how government works and how systems are set up as well, so that we know what our role is in improving the governance in our country. And through this, we can create a politically empowered generation. All right. So today's episode, we actually have a guest, and our guest's name is Irungu. The other name is hard, but he'll tell us, and we'll also write it in the description box if you want to look at it. So Mr. Irungu is actually, he describes himself as an activist, and he's worked for 30 years in the NGO space as well. And an interesting fact about him, by the way, is that he was a meme at some point, and we will show you what that meme is. So you may recognize him from that meme, but also from his 30 years of experience in the NGO space. So welcome to the show, Mr. Irungu.
Thank you so much, Suzanne. And first, let me just say I love the podcast. I love the show. Keep it up.
Oh, thank you.
I've not said this to you, but actually I do have it that you are a leader of tomorrow today.
Oh, nice.
Right? If I can put it that way.
Uh-huh.
And I'm sure many of your viewers are also very much convicted around the idea of active citizenship. So just in terms of my identity, my names are Irungu Houghton.
Houghton, yes,
Second
that's
one
the
is
name.
not that difficult, unless you are Wangare Madai, who used to call me Hannington. And Houston. And she would do this regularly just to annoy me, you know?
Oh.
But in terms of my identity,
Yeah.
yes, I've been a meme. I've also been a director of a number of international organizations, 30 years. I've received awards from the African Union and various other things. But I think the most important thing for me now is really an activist. That's the label that I like.
Yeah.
And I hope we can talk a bit more about activism.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, let's get right into it. I think a lot of us think of, and I think we've said this just now, like when we think of activism, we think of Boniface Mwangi. But like, how would you describe activism in your own definition? Like, what do you think activism is?
So first of all, you said something a bit which I think we should repeat on air, which is like, Boniface is a verb, synonymous with activism,
Yes.
right? So I think that's great. No, when I started writing the book, the concept of activism was contested. It was controversial, right? So you either thought it was a badge of honor or you thought it was a troublemaker, right? And 5 years, since then, and really writing the book, I've really explored what it means to be an activist. And essentially what it means is like the Rotarians say, serving higher than self. Having a passion for something that's in the public interest. And that's why in this book, slightly controversially, what I've done is I've put a Secretary General of a medical union, like Dr. Oma Oluga, next to Paula Kahumbu, an environmental conservationist, or Boniface Mwangi, or even for that matter, the First Lady, Margaret Kenyatta, because in many ways she and a lot of people that I've met over the last 5 years, for me, are activists. They wouldn't call themselves activists. But, when you stand for freedom from forced evictions, when you stand for, against medical negligence in our hospitals, or the fact that, our hospitals continue to detain people after they are better, just so that they can recoup money from them. When you stand against any of these things, or even, for example, if you stand against land grabbing in public schools, and I worked for 3 years really ensuring that schools had title deeds. And that program is still running, now led by the Ministry of Lands and the National Lands Commission and Shuleango. When you stand for those things, you are ultimately an activist.
An activist. I mean, it's interesting you brought that up. First of all, you mentioned the book, and the book that he's making reference to is Dialogue and Dissent, and we'll link it in the description box if you want to check it out. If you want to buy it, it's available as well. So we're going to give you a description of how to find it. You've mentioned in the book that you've talked about quite a number of people, and it's synonymous, how you've said that some people would describe activism as being a troublemaker. And I think that term puts off a lot of people, especially young people who are a majority of who is watching us. It puts off a lot of people from trying to participate, because then it labels you as a troublemaker. What do you have to say about that? And has that troublemaker connotation just come up now? Or if we look at the history of activism, has it been consistent?
I mean, you can't avoid being labeled now, right? I mean, either you're apathetic, you are you're the walking dead or walking asleep. Or you are an activist, right? So I think labeling is not the thing we should fear.
Yeah.
It's which label.
Yeah.
Like what would be the total of your life's work? Would it be that, you simply, went to university, or you went to college, or you studied, you got a job, you bought a house, you bought a car, and then you died? Or would it be that you've left an impact on, millions of people? And I think that's really the higher calling that those of us who call ourselves activists, would kind of aim for. That ultimately, and it doesn't have to be a lot of, it doesn't have to be a huge impact. I mean, literally, some of us, we aspire to have national impact.
Yeah.
Others have an inspiration around our families and our communities, certain ethnic groups, for example, or even if you're passionate about people with disabilities, that you leave a difference for that community. And I think that's, for me, what activism is really about. And again, if I'm going to be labeled, and we're all going to be labeled, because there's this thing called the obituary, right?
Yes.
When we die, hopefully there's somebody who stands there and reads our life's work. And if all they can say is like, you were born, you grew up, you earned a bit of money, you bought a house, you had kids, and then you died. Not that that's a bad thing, but I think we can aspire for more as human beings. I never believe that we come to this earth to simply serve ourselves. Ultimately, we are social beings. We are beings that are who we are because of others. Right? And if that doesn't convince you, then the question is, if you see all the things that are happening in this country at the moment, whether it be the recession or the pandemic, or the levels of corruption and impunity, or the levels of inequalities, I would, really be asking myself, what am I doing to make sure that my children or my neighbor's children have a better life experience than I did?
I see.
If you are disillusioned, cynical, fatalistic about this country, then my request to you is, give up the complaint, get committed to something, and just take actions.
True. I mean, that's very... It resonates with me quite a bit.
That's why I started by telling you who you are for me, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting that you say this. Like, I would be very curious to know, like, okay, so why did you get into activism, and how did you get into activism?
I mean, actually, first thing as I realized is that activism is all around us, right? If you think hard about, your family, your parents, their parents, the communities in which they lived, it's probably very likely that around them, where things worked, there were activists making them work. I'll just give an example. So I grew up in a biracial home, or an interracial home. My mother was from Nyeri. And she worked for KBC in those days. She was also a beautician, and she came down from Nyeri to work at KBC, and she met this young publisher from Britain. He was white, British, Anglo-Saxon. He had never met black people before he got posted out to Kenya. So he met a lot of black people all at once, and one of them kind of tugged at his heart, and they got married. And then I was produced. My father, a white man, at the age of 12, once told me that, there is no way that I can protect you against racism. I've never experienced it. I have no tools to be able to coach you on. But what he did was he brought me a set of civil rights literature. So I had read Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, the Soledad Brother, Eldridge Cleaver, a whole range of materials. And I grew up listening to Nina Simone.
Oh, nice.
And a host of other African-American singers who he loved. And what he said was that I can only give you access to people who know how to deal with racism and leave you to get on with it, And that's what he did for me, He provided that for me. Now, if you ask me, when's the point in my life where I began to feel that I have to do something? It's in the book. It's at the age of 14.
Oh, nice.
And I'm a secondary school student, and I was waiting at a bus stop, catching a bus to go to school, and I was the 10th person in the queue. And as I was waiting, of course it's like morning, and I was probably very sleepy and grumpy and whatever because I had to go to school. A woman walked past another woman who was at the front of the queue, stopped, came back, and began to pull out her hair, like almost like hair by hair by hair. Right? Till this woman had actually fallen to the ground, and all around her were literally hair and hair roots. She literally did this. She must have done this for like it seems like ages now, but she must have done it for at least 3 or 4 minutes. And nobody in the queue stood up for her.
Oh,
Nobody
wow.
stood up and said anything. Everybody looked the other way. It was like we just didn't see it happen, right? And I was at the back of this queue. I was 14. I watched the whole thing. What was most embarrassing and shameful for me, and I do feel a sense of shame even now as I tell the story, was not that everybody else didn't do anything, but I didn't take any action. Right? Now, that experience of a 14-year-old being paralyzed in the face of injustice has really lived with me ever since.
So you've talked about writing this book, Dialogue and Dissent. I just want to know, like, what was your motivation behind writing the book? What inspired you to do this?
I guess there were two things. One was, a very immediate thing was standing up in a meeting and talking about a friend of mine who had died. A very good friend of mine who wrote a lot, and somebody stood up at the back and said, Irungu, you are now one of the elders. Stop writing 140 character tweets and write a book. And I looked at him and I accepted the challenge.
Yeah.
So actually the book is also dedicated to him.
Oh, nice. You, in the book, like, you've talked about a couple of people that you've mentioned. You've talked about, you've mentioned John Allen Namu. You've mentioned Rachel Mukali, who I know from Mathare. You've also talked about Boniface Mwangi. What made you think of these characters when you were writing this book, or why did you have them here? And
so back in 2016, many of the 9 individuals that I kind of go into a bit of detail with, they weren't really that well known. And what I wanted to do was to actually describe their journeys, like, what is the making of an activist? And particularly, they work on a whole range of different issues, from wildlife protection to anti-corruption work to, health workers and their welfare, and even, philanthropic cookouts, or what do you call it? I guess soup kitchens for the homeless, So people like Clifford Olwatch and Homeless of Nairobi, they're also in the book,
Oh, nice.
And Rachel, of course, is just wonderful. She rises every morning and she just is committed to Mathare and making sure that is a neighborhood that has safety and dignity for everybody. So really, that period was really trying to understand the different journeys of activists and how do they get to that point. And then at that time, there was a lot of consideration and questions I used to get about fear.
Yeah.
Right, and if you remember, Boniface at one point did this mock funeral or mock death, and he was just trying to break through the idea that we should be frightened. But it was important that people understand that activism, that being frightened is part of being an activist, but that actually the only fear that you should fear is the fear.
Yes.
Right. So I asked people like John Allen Namu, when you're doing investigative journalism, how do you deal with the issue of fear? And what came back was just really wonderful set of reflections around how do you manage fear. And one of my heroes from the book is Eric Gitari, and Eric is a lawyer. He's also a gay man, and he's publicly gay, and has done probably as much as anybody really to give us an insight into what it means to have a sexuality that is unacceptable by the majority of society. And if I can just tell a little bit of that story, Eric, and I just felt privileged to hear him tell the story about how his greatest fear as a gay man was not really what the world thought, and there was a degree of fear, but it was really about his grandmother, and being accepted by his grandmother. And I won't spoil the story, but he just come out and talk to his grandmother about being gay, and he got the shock of his life.
Oh, nice.
Shock of his life.
That is very interesting. I mean, it sounds quite rich, to be quite frank with you.
It's 50 pages, so
nice.
It won't take you very long. It's very simply written. Much of my background is policy.
Oh, nice. Okay.
So I had to have an editor keep telling me. I told the
too
editor,
complex.
Yeah, just don't go into those madhabus. Just talk seriously about people stories.
Yes.
So it's really a story about people.
Oh, nice. And I think it sounds almost like, of course, it's giving experiences of people in their different spaces doing different things, but it sounds almost like a little bit of a guide in terms of, okay, so this is how this person did this, and this is how, and I guess most of us can plug into those stories and see how we fit in to be more active as citizens. And that's even why we do this anyway, because we're trying to have an active citizenry, a politically empowered generation, like we keep saying. All right, so that sounds very interesting. I mean, I can't leave you without talking to you about the Constitution. I mean, the book is talking about a constitution in search of a country. And right now, obviously, we're looking at constitutional amendments. And I don't know what your view is on this whole process. Yeah.
So I think, there are kind of three things that I'm present at the moment. One is what a struggle it was to get one of the best constitutions in the world, right? And this book talks about that. It's kind of Constitution 4.0.
Yeah.
So there are 4 generations of constitutions across Africa, and Kenya has really generated probably one of the best constitutions. I mean, I don't think maybe only South Africa comes close to it, but I think even in terms of our Bill of Rights and in terms of the Chapter 4, the integrity and leadership section, and maybe even the land section, we really have done very well. The second thing really is how important it is to create a culture that enforces the Constitution.
Yeah.
So, I was once told 2 years ago, hii katiba ni kama calendar. We had one in 2010, now we have another one, and so on. And I think it's really important to say that, books and laws and constitutions do not exist in a vacuum. They have to have a culture of constitutionalism. And enforcement is really critical. So this is really a book about the enforcers, the constitutionalists, the people who rose to protect the Constitution. And it's not just the 9 people. It's really the paramedic, for example, Brian Odhiambo, who chose to drive Alex Madaga, the late Alex Madaga, for 18 hours to keep him alive in a ambulance rather than have him rejected in a hospital because he didn't have a title deed or he didn't have a logbook. It's about him. It's about journalists who keep telling the truth, even when, as Kenyans, we don't rise vigorously enough to stop the corruption.
Yeah.
It's a story about school teachers, who protected land that in many ways was 5, maybe 1,000 times their salary, so the children would have playgrounds for generations to come. And it's a story about that as well, But I think the BBI process, to come specifically to this, is really a conversation around, was this a people-driven process or was it an elite-driven process? And I think, for me personally, it was driven essentially by an elite consensus that was generated around 2 things. One was, how do we stop the violence and the hemorrhaging around our elections, right? And I think that's a legitimate concern. And what do you do with the runner-up president, who is extremely powerful, has invested a lot in running for the presidential campaigns, has a sizable population that support them? And could we find a space for them as leader of the opposition? That's a legitimate concern.
Yeah.
The second impetus really, I think, has been less convincing for me. The idea that you need to have 5 deputy prime ministers, the idea that we need to arbitrarily change constituencies. And more importantly, I think, what has been a major concern to us is how this process has been manipulated essentially to provide enough goodies so that certain things will pass. And therefore, I supported the decision by the High Court recently.
I see.
I do support the right of the President and the former Prime Minister to go to the appeal court, and for them to exercise, their rights within a legal process, without victimizing the judiciary. And I think that's the nature of our democratic process. I will meet the BBI process when it is placed in a referendum question, personally, and I hope everybody that's watching this will do the same.
Okay. Yes, you've had him. If it comes to the referendum, we have to go and vote, imagine. But here we don't tell you whether to vote yes or no. We inform you to make that choice for yourself. So I appreciate your views in terms of looking at how the Constitution is being changed. And I think it's a good period for us as Kenyans even to just critically look at a process as a process, as opposed to it being a tribal thing, or just what is this thing saying? How will it affect us? Just look at it like that. Is it important? Is it necessary? And so I think I see this as a learning point for Kenyans, just in general. So lastly, we've come to almost the end of this session. And I think maybe I would like you to speak to a young Kenyan out there who probably looks at the country and is like, I don't know what to do, and is trying to do something. Like, how would you advise them to go about it?
Yeah. So I would start by just reminding people that, my road to Damascus moment was when I was 14, right? Everybody has been 14 once.
Yeah.
And everybody could be 14 every day in their lives. And that moment will come where, either the injustice will find you or you will find it. It'll come into your space. It'll either be, gender-based violence. It'll be either defilement of a child. It will be, building bylaws not being respected in your community. We could go on. I mean, there's hundreds of different ways that you can be called to serve and to be great. The question we have to ask ourselves is whether we want to be great or whether we just want to be average, mediocre citizen.
Yeah.
Right? That watches the country go downwards rather than having this moment. And I do believe that in our lifetime, I mean, I've probably had about maybe 50 moments where I've been called to choose chaos or a country. Right? And the action is not that complicated.
Yeah.
It's not that complicated. One of the stories in the book is the story of Alex Madaga. Alex Madaga was a security guard. He was in his 20s. And I was in a conference and opened up the newspaper. And in the front page of the newspaper was the story of the security guard who had been kept in an ambulance for 18 hours to keep him alive. And I didn't know what to do. Right? I didn't know what to do. I just knew that it was crazy. Like, this is the capital city of Kenya. We have at least 500 different hospitals that could have treated him. And he was rejected by 3 hospitals because he didn't have either health insurance or he didn't have a title deed that he could put in front of them.
Yeah.
And I literally just went to Kenyatta National Hospital. And I just went to his bedside. And I tried to understand how could this be possible. And then I met his family. Then I met doctors, and then came a campaign. Now, some of you may be listening and saying, but you were probably working for an NGO, so they allowed you to leave work and all that kind of stuff.
Thanks for passing by, and thanks for gracing us with your presence. I mean, we really do appreciate your thoughts, especially around activism. I think it's a concept that's not very well understood. So the more we talk about it, probably, the more we can get more people to participate actively in whatever role that fits them, for sure. And I really like what you said about injustice will either find you or you will find it. And so at some point we have to take action. And so I think you guys, this episode will conclude with us just saying, go buy the book and let's have conversations about it and see how else we can, plug into the country, because at the end of the day, it's our country and there's nowhere else we're going. Like, we have to fix our own country. So thank you so much for having us. I do have to mention, by the way, guys, the font is nice. Like, seriously, you won't struggle reading it.
You don't have to look for glasses.
No. No, we are young here. Here we are young. We don't look for that.
And there are pictures at the back also.
Oh, and there are pictures.
Even baby photos.
Yeah, baby photos of Irungu. Guys, this is legit.
I bear my soul. Right?
But yes, we'll link it in the description box below if you'd like to look for this book. And thank you so much for coming. And any last words?
No, just...
Do you want to send salams to anyone?
To the family and friends. And no, just to say I'm so honored. Thank you very much for just inviting me on the show.
Yeah.
And keep watching all the episodes. So that's a plug. And it's been a pleasure. I mean, it's been a great life so far. And I do look forward to the next 5 years, and maybe it'll produce another volume.
We hope so.
But actually more interesting, maybe it will encourage people to write their own books.
Yes.
Because I think that's the thing that I find exciting about this.
Yes, absolutely. And just like you said, make sure you like and subscribe to this channel. If you like this video, please share it as well to a friend. If you want to find Mr. Irungu, we can actually put your Twitter.
Yeah, Twitter account at Irungu Houghton.
At Irungu Houghton, okay.
I'm completely a digital native.
Okay, that's good. Are you on Instagram?
Yes, I am. The one that I struggle with is TikTok.
It's TikTok, okay. We are all struggling.
We're all... I struggle with it a bit.
Really? So what? All right. Yes, we'll tag your Twitter handle and your Instagram handle if you'd like to reach out to him.
And I'm also on Facebook and LinkedIn, and I can be found in Amnesty circles.
In Amnesty, okay. But we'll definitely leave those if you would like to reach out to them. So yes, this has been our episode. Please don't forget to subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Bye.